had just ventured into one of the many stories that our man has about why it is he embarked on a journey from Hull to Jeddah via a humber barge.
Well, you can imagine our state of mind, having to turn around the Epony Lock and go all the way down the Seine back to Le Havre. And we were very depressed. So I thought, well, the best thing to do is to test the ship. So one thing is taking a humber barge in the North Sea, which I'm used to, but it's another thing taking it into the Atlantic. So I decided to test the ship in the Atlantic Ocean by sailing to the Channel Islands. I pulled in at Alderney because we had pirate connections there, and then went to Guernsey. Guernsey was an incredible experience of crazy, ridiculous bureaucracy. From Guernsey, I decided to go to Brest, but I managed to get to Brest in good time, so I continued on down the French coast a little further. Then the weather broke up, and we had to stop for a couple of days. Then when the weather was right, and I felt right, and we all felt right, I decided to sail across the Bay of Biscay. And most people will tell you the Bay of Biscay it's got a life of its own. It can go from flat calm to a forced storm in a question of hours. And it can go from a forced storm to flat calm in another few hours. It's an incredibly strange, unpredictable sea.
Okay, Bay of Biscay, you're in a humber barge. For people that may not know about sailing and this kind of navigation, how often would a humber barge be seen on the Bay of Biscay? What type of vessels are normally traveling on the Bay of Biscay?
Well, a humber barge has never been on the Bay of Biscay. It's made for a river. And the only people on the Bay of Biscay are large ships, small French coasters, and Spanish or French fishermen with particularly good ships and boats to handle the weather. So for a humble barge to be on the Bay of Biscay is really its overall limits.
When you say very good boats, larger boats, what type of scale compared to a humber barge are we talking?
Well, if you can imagine the classical fishing boats from Grimsby, for example, which is easy to imagine, that's about 1.5 to 2 times bigger than us. All the other ships are 10, 20, 30 times bigger than us. So, we're really, we shouldn't be there. There you go.
Yeah, that is literally fish out of water, like definition.
So given that by your own admission, you shouldn't be there, what made you think it was a good idea to even consider, let alone actually do?
Well, it's a question of there's no choice. You either go back and cancel the job and fail, or you push forward, and there's only one thing to do. You've got to get across this bay. There's no other route.
And with your team, there was initially 3 of you, weren't there?
Yeah, there was myself, my engineer, and our boatman, both from Hull. And we'd almost made it. Suddenly, this forced storm came out of nowhere. The seas and the bay just lifted up. And we had to seek shelter. And the nearest place we could get into was a tiny little port called La Tepia in the north of Spain. Very difficult port to get into. With a forced storm blowing around you, it made it even harder, what with rocks on the left and the right and a particular approach angle. Finally, we got in there. And even inside this little port, this little harbour, there were swells from the bay. So it wasn't comfortable at all.
Because had you been there before? Because again, I'm guessing you didn't even know the best route in, or you've got to figure that out sometimes if you haven't been to a port and do that in a storm.
No, I'd never been there before, but I do have a particular skill, and that is getting into impossible places. And later on in the story, there are other impossible places I got into. But I got into La Tepia, and we were stuck there for about a week to 10 days. It was impossible to leave. And then suddenly, after 10 days, it calmed down a little. So we managed to eke our way a few hours a day along the North Spanish coast in an attempt to get to La Coruña. Well, we finally got to La Coruña, and the storm was northerly with massive northerly waves. And as we turned south, I edged further away from the coast towards these mountainous waves, right, to test out what I've come to term as barge surfing. And I managed to catch the right waves. And of course, for the first 25 minutes or 30 minutes, it's incredibly frightening because you're looking behind you, a 30, 35-foot wave that's just breaking on its top, and it's above you, and it's as if it's going to fall down on you, but it never does. At the same time, like surfing, you have to change course 5 or 6 degrees left and right. If you go straight, you're going to lose the control, like a surfer does, you know. Also, at the same time, you have to have your hand on the speed, because if you go too fast, you go to the bottom of the wave. If you go too slowly, the wave catches you up. So it was quite an incredibly difficult thing to learn. But because of the fear of the wave behind you, you learn that very quickly. And after about half an hour, you kind of calm down and you've got hold of the situation. I moved out even further away from the coast where there were bigger waves, and I managed to catch the right one. And I knew at that point we weren't going to stop. And we ended up barge surfing, if you like, all the way down the Portuguese coast and pulled into Lagos and Portimao, exhausted, but extremely happy because we'd saved 1.5 days with the speed we were doing.
Okay, couple of questions immediately spring to mind. You just said that barge surfing is a difficult thing to learn, but you didn't have any time to learn it. You invented it on the spot. So what was the thought process that made you think the only option is for me to try a new way of navigating a boat that has never been done before?
I drew upon my pirate teachings and sailing ships. If you look at the classical sailing ship, you'll notice that the bow is rather similar to a barge. It's not pointed like most ships are, it's rounded. And they used to use waves to gather speed to escape or to attack. So I knew about this in my mind from my teaching, but I'd never done it. So I had to teach myself, and it took 25 minutes.
And how did the crew feel about what it is that you were doing? Did you tell them that you were going to do it, or did you just do it? And then if you did just do it without telling them, what was their reaction as you were doing this?
Well, we have to go back a little bit to La Tepia, where he became so afraid because of the full storm in the Bay of Biscay that he decided to leave us. So our crew now was just myself and my engineer, just the two of us. And was slightly panicky at first, but I made him stay in control of the speed, and with his sense of control of his engine on the speed, it took away a sense of fear that he had. And together I have to say, we quite enjoyed the experience. It was a learning experience, very dangerous experience, but once we'd got control of it, it was pretty good.
Going back to the team aspect of that, how much did it affect you losing that third man, and then it's just two of you going across this kind of wild storm?
Well, there was no way we could get another team member out there, or a Spanish one. So our idea was that let's try and get to Gibraltar. There we can either get a team member flown out or arrange for one local from Gibraltar. In any case, we had to get to Gibraltar, just the two of us. So there was no choice. As for the danger part, well, after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, it became so natural what we were doing that I know if you saw a scene of it, it would be terrifying. But there were moments when we could actually light up a cigarette with a lighter in the middle of this storm, and there was no problem. You know, the lighter wouldn't blow out. It was we were right in the middle of a vacuum in a storm.
Talk to me about the cigarette. Why would you light up a cigarette when you are trying to hold on for dear life in an incredibly inhospitable storm in a vessel that is not designed to be traveling in that weather? Why at that particular time would you also think, yeah, let me just take one hand off a wheel, let me light up a cigarette? Why would you do that?
Well, you don't have much time to learn at sea. You either learn immediately or die. And so after 25 minutes to an hour, you've learned all the intricacies of it. You know that you need 5 degrees to the left, 5 degrees to the right, not 10. You know that how to speed up and slow down the right moment. You've also always got one eye behind over your shoulder at the wave behind you. And you get to a point where you've got total control of the situation. You become extremely happy and you light up a cigarette.
Fair enough.
It's like it's flow state. It's kind of that connection you have with the sea. It's that flow. It's when you talk about understanding it.
Or you haven't got any longer. You've just got minutes to learn this because you're dealing with 35-foot waves and winds and currents and there's so much going on that you don't have time to think about lighting up a cigarette. You don't have time to think of anything except what you're doing. But when you get to that point where you finally understand you've got full control of the situation, I suppose you become so calm and so into this sense of contact with the sea, and the wave behind you becomes part of you, part of the ship, and you're all one together, that you totally relax and light a cigarette.
And what did you learn about the sea from that encounter? What did it teach you?
What that episode taught me was the barge. That sure, I was in a place I shouldn't be, in a vessel that shouldn't be there, but you could control it in such a way that it was perfectly aligned to the problems you have. And it was, our barge would do around 9 knots, which is about 14, 15 miles an hour. And we were doing at least 22 miles an hour. So we were, the barges had never been so fast as the way we were going. And as I say, we saved 1.5 days along that Portuguese coast. And unfortunately, when we entered the port of Gibraltar, I went to report to the port captain, and I entered his office and I said, "Good morning, Cap." And his reply was, "You are arrested." And I said, "What? You and your vessel are arrested." About an hour later, a team of port officials came down to the boat with big chains and welding gear, and they chained us to the dock. We were arrested.
Did they explain why you were being arrested?
The main reason was humber barges were not allowed in the Atlantic. So I said to the captain, I said, "Listen, we're now in the Mediterranean. So, who cares?" Yeah.
How did he take that?
Well, he said, you came here via the Atlantic. And I said, "Can you prove that?" And he said, "Yes. And you're arrested." And that was it. There was no further conversations possible. And we were chained. Our vessel was chained to the North Mole in the Gibraltar harbour.
Is it almost like the boat's arrested, or were you also physically put in jail, put in holding? What was the limits on you? Because I know
the law states that you must stay with the vessel. The vessel is arrested, so therefore you're also arrested.
Yeah.
And it's pretty heavy because, if we were to leave the port, we had to ask permission. Where are you going? We're going to the supermarket. And when you came back, they looked in the bags, and it was really heavy stuff. But we were allowed to be free on board the vessel. But the vessel was chained and welded literally to the dock.
So what did you think about next? Did you think, well, that's it? That's the end of the adventure?
There's never an end to an adventure, because if you fail, you're not going to get another job. You're not going to be, a failed pirate is a failed pirate, and that's the end of your career. It's pretty heavy stuff to fail. So we had several tons of fuel oil waiting for us in Gibraltar. And when the tanker came, he was stopped at the dock gates and he wasn't allowed to refuel us. And without fuel, we could go nowhere.
How is fuel your first problem when you're already chained as a vessel? How is that the first problem and not escaping?
Well, you can't escape without fuel. So let's get fueled up first somehow, and then put a plan into action of escaping.
At what point, and let's take it right back to the beginning of this part. So you've gone into Gibraltar, you walked up to the captain, and he said you're arrested. How long after that did it take you to think, I'm going to start my escape plan now?
A few minutes. It's automatic, as soon as you're arrested, you've got to escape. We didn't plan on them stopping our fuel arriving, and that gave us a big problem. Luckily, today, the North Mole of the harbour of Gibraltar is where the cruise ships stop. But in those days, it was the refueling depot for Her Majesty's Royal Navy. And they had these huge, great big fuel tanks, and white and grey on 4 or 5 legs, huge. And they were all chained up with big valves and everything. But on the bottom of these tanks, on every tank, there's a little tap, which is used for taking the water out of the fuel. There's always water that gathers inside the tank. So every now and then they would open this tap to allow the water to come out so that the tank only contained fuel oil. So we devised a plan whereby we would swim across at night. We would swim across the dock. It's about 60, 70 feet across, up the ladder, and we cut a hole in the fence and crawled through to see if it had a tap, and it did have a tap. Well, there were about 3 or 4 of these tanks, and one of them had a tap. We opened the tap, and water came out, and after about 5 minutes, the water stopped coming out, and fuel oil was coming out. So we closed the tap. The following night, we stole an extremely long hose pipe from the port authorities. We swam across again and fitted the hose pipe, simple hose pipe, onto this tap. And then he swam back to the boat, gave me a signal. I opened the tap. Now, all the time this is happening, there are Royal Navy guards with guns, walking up and down. They're guards doing their job. Sometimes they were about 20 feet away from me, but because they never looked under the tank to see me, and we were all filthy black from oil anyway. When we had filled up all our tanks, all our reserve, and everything we could fill up, that's several tons of fuel oil, we closed the tap, climbed back down into the dock, swam back across. Then we took the hose pipe back to where we'd stolen it from, and that was probably the most dangerous part because we had to clean it. It was full of oil. So we spent about half an hour cleaning the hose pipe, getting it back. And then we had fuel. So now we can plan our escape.